Hey, first of all, thank you guys for joining me today. I watched the film last night, and it was almost like an extended skit, if you will. Like it just kept getting crazier and crazier and crazier. Very reminiscent of like Mr. Show from HBO days. And yeah, it was a fun ride. So thank you guys, and I'm happy to chat about it. So I guess Chris, can you elaborate a little bit on the rise on how the rise of the Great Hate Magnet in 2016 kind of inspired this film? And ultimately, how did you develop the concept from that initial idea?
Um, it's sort of one of those things where when it wasn't exactly a like, oh, we really want to talk about this, but I remember many times when Larry would and I would meet in a bar in the bar as we did in the evenings most weeks. As we were developing the character, it was always this kind of like salesman, used car salesman, kind of like positive, never taking no for an answer type thing. And, I just think it's like there's this great Godard quote about being political, or no, maybe it's not that. Anyway, the point is that you can't not be political. Like if you're living in the world where this crazy thing was happening, and back then that was like when the Trump show was sort of just beginning. Um, and I think Larry and I were both very aware of like this clownish character that seemed much more dangerous than the news was sort of putting him on this platform as being this clown. And it's just so and just to see where we are now, it's kind of crazy. But yeah, I just think it's like Larry is a very political person, and and I always talk about he's like one of my few friends that I talk about politics with, and it's one of these things where it just can't help but be infused in the thing that we're creating, you know.
But if
Yeah,
I could just say, I mean, I think the real issue is that whatever Trump and the politics and all of that, that's because this is how people are feeling. And, we just made a character portrait of somebody who feels disenfranchised, disrespected. And that's been true all along. You have these kind of characters. I mean, you have Robert De Niro in King of Comedy feels dissed and disrespected. It's a tradition. They're people who feel and they lash out. So we often spoke about Trump at not Chris and I, but when we were pitching it to sort of frame it for somebody to understand what the effect of the movie would be. But I have to say that Chris is coming at this from just a character standpoint, and there's also a lot of affection for characters like uh what's his name? Yeah, the Ed Wood,
Yeah,
people who are
that was a big
benign,
one.
uh, people who are deeply lovable, and we wanted that as much as it's not supposed to be a direct commentary on our boys in politics
But
because
I
that
do
just be
think if
boring.
you're, but I do think it's like one of these things, like Larry's saying, bringing it back to character with me, which I always just sort of keep reinvesting in who this person is, what their life is, what do they want, how that kind of speaks to the drama that's going to unfold. But like, if you're putting them in contemporary times, it's kind of just hard not to say what the like to not reflect the opinions that these people might have or what they express about the times, being who
yeah,
they are. And I also just love this, like, not love, but I this is something that we've spoken to a lot, Larry, about like, the middle class kind of fighting with each other, placing blame, pointing, like John being very like Shane is the problem. He's getting all the glory, but you don't know what it's like to be him. Just because he had a review written about him doesn't mean that he's like, having champagne every day. And I think it just speaks to this like we're just kind of fighting with the wrong people. And you're quoting from my thing that I wrote as a director statement, which was just to say like I think a lot of the things that I want to push forward with the movie is this idea of like um perspectives that clash with each other, but they don't have to. It just comes from this like deep misunderstanding. And I think on a good day, John Spinelli is probably not a bad guy, but on this day, so it's a, I like to approach the character as much as like as their own hero and their own sort of wills and stuff.
Yeah, I always like to read the director's notes either before or after the film. And fortunately, I actually read it after because I kind of wanted to go into this one blind because the trailer was so intriguing, but it kind of delivers on this point of like wanting to know more, want to get more inside your head as to like how this project kind of came to be. And speaking of the characters, I'm kind of curious as to like how you guys approached the casting process for this film because this cast, it's an eclectic cast, but it's a small, tight cast, and I can tell that there's some real effort behind choosing these people. And yeah, so from my perspective, you guys knocked it out of the park, but I'm just kind of curious as to how that experience was and how that ultimately shaped the film.
Um, it Crabcatcher was many different things, as many movies are, as the movie grows and the world responds to it. But the in terms of casting, the seed that was planted is when I decided to go with um, Rigo Garay as the character, and that shifted where the story started in terms of like a lot of things in it. And But for me, it was sort of, I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of like I feel like that decision was based on love and based on like it was during the pandemic when we're all sort of isolated. And I just remember being like, I just wanted to make something, and I love Rigo, and I was like, I just want to make a movie with my friends. And you really don't have to say much more than that to Larry to get him on your side about it. And then it just sort of that kind of informed everything. And then as soon as I was like, okay, Rigo is dedicated and wants to do everything he can to live in these shoes, then anyone who comes onto the project, they take a page out of his book, and it's like, oh, well, he's committing like that, so now I have to commit like that. And I think it was all based on kind of like we started with Shane and John Sparadakis, who has been a collaborator of Glass Eye Pix and Larry for a long time, and I've known him forever, and he's just a beloved kind of artist. Sorry, someone's beeping me. And the point is once we had that team, then we found Ella, and then we started doing these rehearsals, and it was just these experimentations, and sometimes we would do exercises that had nothing to do with the movie, but it was just about like getting people comfortable. And you know, one thing that was I not by design, but if I was doing it again, I would do it the same way. We shot the wedding scene last,
Hmm.
and I think it speaks to like the journey that those two actors went on together and the sort of closeness. And I think that there's such a like for an actor, I feel like if you're in a scene with someone taking pictures, if you don't even have to think when you put your hand on her back, like the actor isn't thinking, oh, am I getting too close to her ass? Or like, is she gonna? And
Yeah.
I don't think there was any of that in his head because they were so comfortable with each other already. And I think that small little like, is she going to be okay with that? That changes a performance exponentially. So I think with I was really dead set on rehearsal process and trying to create a real relationship rather than a relationship that was digestible and got the audience on their side quickly. Like that save the cat thing. I just wanted to create something real and then turn it completely Dr. Seuss.
Well, it definitely felt real, and I think a big reason for that is how you guys were able to kind of balance the tone. Like there is these human elements or these human moments and horror and comedy. I guess keeping that in mind, how did you approach that challenge of balancing the film's humor with its darker, more intense moments? And was there any particular techniques to ensure that this tone was kind of consistent because it was almost like it had its own world that we were kind of watching, like almost like a voyeuristic, just not your everyday world, in my opinion.
Well, what I would say that just to speak to Larry and I's relationship, it kind of and because I'll get to what you're saying, but the point is that I remember a very first conversation that Larry and I had, and it was all about Polanski and our love for him, and specifically how he uses perspective to draw the audience into absurdity and horror. And it's kind of that's the answer. It's single point of view, really. Like you believe it because I'm not cutting to Leah when she's doing something. It's fully through Shane's perspective the entire movie. Um, and that was something over the course of the writing that, we kept being like, oh, maybe we'll cut away. And then it's like, no, we can't. And it was always through that perspective. And I think another one, Larry, maybe you can speak a little to this because I remember we've had so many discussions about this in terms of like, don't don't cut. Like you can't cut to another part of the movie yet, or you can't jump time. And I
Yeah.
think with this, that was like we had endless discussions about like, no, we can't cut here. We have to keep it in real time. And I think that speaks to the tone shifts because that is really like having patience with that is what makes you like, what the fuck is happening kind of a thing because of that. So
Well, one thing we would always talk about is, if we felt like, oh, well, we can pick up the pacing if we cut ahead, I'd always say, but we don't want the movie to be guided by the filmmaker. We want to be with the characters and be sort of dragged along. And I think when you are involved in the details, then the frustrations become absurdities. And that's where that little fine line between humor and realism find a sweet spot because you're just like so there's an element of frustration that you introduce into a movie like this. It's an old Aristotle idea, the unified time and place. So we're in one location, so we're stuck there, and we're unified in our time as well. So when you just wish you knew what would happen, 10 minutes later, no, you got to suffer through those details. So it was just a way that Chris and I talked as we were considering moments in the movie was always like we can't let the filmmaker guide this. Let's stay in the reality. The only other thing I wanted to say, and it sort of speaks to the idea of comedy versus, but also this character of John is, you know, I've been an actor in the past, and you never play a villain. And we knew that John Sparadakis would never play that character as a villain. He plays him as a sympathetic guy with all of his foibles and insecurities and desperations and but this is an important thing, and I think that's where Chris could find the trust that it's more about building up a character and what are his dreams. He dreams of he speaks very carefully about what kind of cars he likes. And, he's one of those people that's very opinionated about when America was, on top, which is sort of a fantasy, but he's bought into it and he wants to be part of that dream. So it's a movie about the American dream, which has been a tradition in storytelling in America since the beginning, since the dream was first had,
dreamt.
since it was first dreamt. And none of us have ever gotten to
I know. Since Coca-Cola dreamt it.
yeah.
Well, Larry, I'm glad that you brought that up because like that was kind of where I was wondering, how does this fit into the larger body of work for Glass Eye Pix, especially in terms of the theme?
Well, the idea that it is connected to our reality and yet it's a genre piece. That's really my jam. I obviously make werewolf movies, but
Yeah.
there's social commentary, Frankenstein movies. Chris shot that movie. We built it together. That was about PTSD. And, I just wanted to figure out how to update these classic stories. And that mission continues. I think that Ty West, who's an early Glass Eye guy, he especially when he started out, he was also telling stories that were very detailed, but there was a sense of accumulating dread because you're living sort of, it's once again, it's about that pacing where you sort of wish you could cut forward and be in the comfort of the filmmaker, but no, we're actually going to sort of live through these details. And I think when you have an independent film, you have the ability to control pacing and the nuance of character that maybe when you have a bigger budget and more responsibility towards the investors, you're a little bit more cowed and you feel like you can't take those risks. As far as Glass Eye, our main agenda, if you think about all the filmmakers who I've worked with, some of them aren't even in the genre world, like Kelly Reichardt. It's always about supporting their vision. And people often say, how have I mentored these people? And actually, my mentorship is about listening, trying to get them to find their best way forward. And even though we tried to do Crumb Catcher in the traditional method, we got an interesting cast that might have raised a certain amount of money, but in the end, I think, of course, it was the pandemic, but that's when Chris sort of found himself, which was to make the smaller version with the money that he had carefully raised through friends and family, and then cast people that he really could trust and follow his muse, because Chris is no stranger to showbiz. His father's in the industry. And so we understood, and so is James Skotchdopole, one of our producers, who tremendously supportive. But in the end, I think this ended up being more robust as a glass eye minded picture. Of course, we worked with gigantic pictures as well. So the point is we made the indie version. And I think that's where Chris was able to fully express himself as an artist.
Excellent. Yeah. So as we wrap up, that was a great answer, by the way. I loved every second of that. So thank you. Chris, I want to know where, like, ultimately, what do you want viewers to get out of this? And then kind of where do you go from here? I think this is going to make some waves. And I'm really excited to kind of, write you down as like one of the guys to be on the lookout for. So I'm going to be looking for you, years to come. And this really touched me. It was a solid film, kept me awake, and I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the ride, man, all the way through.
Kind of a low bar, dude.
Yeah.
That awesome, and thanks for all that. I mean, I think again, I mean, I was actually just speaking to Rigo today on the phone and just sort of reminding him and myself as well, just like enjoy this and like this is happening right now, and like don't forget that we're in the moment, it's happening, it's good, and like try to think about that. And I just I could cry thinking about it, but I just think I just had a child too, so you're just sort of was watching this. I watched this Adam Sandler movie the other night called Click, where he loses his family to like always thinking about the future, and it just like kind of fucking wrecked me. And I think it's like I'm just trying to enjoy this right now. And if I look back to the seeds of where Crumb Catcher started, it was about a guy who didn't want to be at his wedding. It wasn't about a crumb catcher. And my personality or things that I'm interested in sort of brought me to this world that found itself. And I just feel like even the instinct to go with my pal in the beginning to make that was a spiritual kind of like, I want to do this for my people. And now it seems to be registering on a much bigger level. And I think for me, I'm just on the spiritual thing of being like, I need to focus on that. And stay true to that. And to answer your question, the next movie is about a dry cleaner. So we'll see where that takes us.
Just to add context, I just had a baby as well. So that's
That's
kind of what I
cool.
was referring to as far as the staying awake. But
Oh,
yeah,
right.
great ride, man. Congratulations on the baby and the film. And yeah, this has been truly a blessing. Thank you guys for your time.
Oh, thanks so much,
Thanks a
man.
lot.
Nice to speak with you.